You know what's wild? We romanticize ancient music Rome. The columns, the togas, the philosophy, Marcus Aurelius meditating on virtue while ruling an empire. But here's what they don't put in the history books you read in high school. What actually happened when Rome won. Not the battles, not the tactics. I'm talking about the aftermath. The part where the cameras, if they'd had cameras, would have been turned off. Let me paint you a picture. It's 272 CE outside Antioch. Queen Zenobia's army just got crushed by Roman legions. Her generals there expecting death. Clean, quick soldiers' death. That's not what they got. What they got was something Rome had perfected over centuries, breaking people without killing them. And if you were a woman who wore a crown, yeah, it got worse. See, here's the thing about Roman law that nobody really talks about. Once you lost, I mean really lost, like your city fell or your army surrendered, you stopped being a person. Legally, the Romans had this concept, agentum, law of nations they called it, fancy name for a brutal reality. Defeat turned you into property. Didn't matter if you were a queen music yesterday. Today you had the same legal standing as the lowest foot soldier in your defeated army. Actually, scratch that, you had less, because at least Roman citizens had rights. They couldn't be publicly beaten without causing music a scandal, couldn't be executed without a trial, but foreign captives no protection, none, zero. The 12 Tables, that's Rome's earliest legal code, goes back to the 5th century BCE, spelled it out pretty clearly. Prisoners of war belonged to the Roman state, or they got divided up among the soldiers, like splitting up treasure, and women of royal blood. Their crowns meant nothing once music the chains went on. Tacitus wrote about this. You know Tacitus, right? Roman historian didn't pull punches. He documented what happened to defeated British royalty and noted his words here, essentially that Roman officials showed zero hesitation in degrading people who'd once commanded armies. And look, if you're finding this stuff as unsettling as I did when I first dug into it, if you want more stories from history that nobody talks about in textbooks, hit that subscribe button because we're just getting started here, and music, trust me, it goes much deeper than you think. Now here's where it gets even darker. Female captives, they faced additional vulnerabilities. Roman military culture, forged through centuries of conquest, viewed captured women as spoils of war. Sure, maybe some elite prisoners got housed in relative comfort while Rome figured out if they were worth ransoming, but most, immediate degradation, that line between prisoner of war and slave, existed only on paper. But Rome wasn't just about breaking people physically. They'd perfected something more insidious. The triumph, the big public parade. Picture this. You're a Roman general who just conquered a kingdom. You petition the Senate for permission to celebrate a triumph. They say yes. Now comes the show. And oh boy, what a show. The route stretched nearly 4 kilometers through Rome's streets from the Field of Mars, through the Forum, all the way up to the Capitol Line Hill. Thousands of people lining the streets and the procession. This wasn't just a parade. It was the ultimate power move. It was Rome showing the world that no matter how big your crown was, they could turn you into a toy for their amusement. First came the musicians and entertainers, then carts. Carts with paintings and models of the conquered cities showing Romans lands they'd never see. Wild animals from exotic territories led in chains. Romans loved that stuff, gave them a glimpse of this unknown world their legions' music had subdued. Then came the main event. The prisoners' captured rulers marched at the front, and here's the twisted part. They'd often leave them in their royal garments, full regalia, crown and all. Why? Because the contrast hit harder. Look at this mighty queen who commanded armies now shuffling in shackles before crowds that are jeering and celebrating her humiliation. The message was clear. No kingdom too distant. No throne too high. Rome could reach you. This wasn't just celebration. This was psychological warfare broadcast across the ancient world. Allies watched. Enemies watched. And they all got the same message written in human suffering. For royal women, the triumph meant walking a gauntlet, while thousands of eyes stripped away every shred of dignity. The whole thing took an entire day, slow march, so every spectator along the route could observe every detail. And the worst part, these captive queens didn't know if they'd survive the day. Some would, others wouldn't see sunset. Their uncertainty, that was part of the torture. Let me tell you about Zenobia, Queen of Palmyra. This woman carved out an empire, stretching from Egypt to Anatolia. She challenged Roman authority across the East. She was formidable. Emperor Aurelian finally crushed her forces in 272, captured her as she fled toward Persia, and 2 years later, in 274, Aurelian got his triumph. The Historia Augusta, that's a collection of imperial biographies written in the 4th century, describes what happened in detail, probably based on eyewitness accounts. And the picture it paints was adorned with jewels that caught the sunlight. They turned her into this glittering monument to Rome's power over the wealthiest kingdoms of the East. But the chains drew the most attention. These weren't simple iron shackles. Zenobia walked bound in heavy golden chains, so massive that gods had to march beside her to help carry the weight. Gold, they used gold specifically. The very wealth she'd commanded now turned into the instrument of her bondage. Her entire person had become a walking display of conquered riches. Sources say she maintained remarkable composure, despite the weight, despite the hours of slow marching through hostile crowds. She carried herself with dignity. Maybe that's what saved music her life. Or Aurelian, impressed by her bearing. Or maybe just calculating that she served his purposes better alive, spared her the execution that awaited most captive rulers. He granted her a villa near Rome instead. Some accounts claim she married a Roman senator, became part of aristocratic society. Her daughters married into noble families. Was this mercy or a more subtle form of humiliation? Historians still debate that. So spent her final decades as a living reminder, a monument to Roman power, her presence in Italian society, a constant demonstration that even the mightiest queen's company. Old be reduced to Roman dependence. Now let me take you back a bit. 60 CE Britain. King Prodigus of the Aeni dies. He left a will, clever will he thought, bequeathed half his territory to Emperor Nero, half to his 2 daughters. Hoped this compromise music would preserve independence while satisfying Roman demands. Strategy failed catastrophically. Roman officials, led by the imperial procurator Dianus Catus, ignored the will, completely seized ally lands and property, declared the entire kingdom forfeit music. And when Queen Boudica protested, this is where it gets ugly. Tacitus recorded what followed. His father-in-law served in Britain during this period, so he had direct sources. And Tacitus, even though ancient historians usually danced around certain subjects, recorded this with unusual directness. Boudica was publicly beaten. The Romans struck her with the whip. They didn't just want to hurt her, they wanted to humiliate her publicly, the Roman leather showing no mercy to her royal skin. To beat a Roman citizen required legal justification, procedural safeguards. To publicly beat a queen of an allied kingdom, that was deliberate humiliation. But the Romans went further. Boudicca's young daughters, certainly unmarried, endured atrocities that Tacitus found too grim to describe music in detail. Tacitus describes these assaults with sparse language that conveys even his own horror. Events that questioned Roman sensibilities about acceptable conduct. The abuse wasn't random violence. It was calculated degradation designed to break the royal family and demonstrate Roman dominance, and it was public, performed before the 2 people. The message: this is what happens when you question imperial authority. The strategy backfired spectacularly. Rather than crushing resistance, the abuse ignited a rebellion that nearly drove Rome from Britain. Boudica raised an army that destroyed 3 Roman cities, including Londinium, devastating tens of thousands. Tacitus preserves a speech he attributes to her. She declares she's not fighting as a queen seeking to preserve her kingdom. She's fighting as a woman avenging her abused body and the brutal crimes committed against her daughters. The rebellion ended in defeat at an unknown battlefield. Tacitus claims that when the battle was lost, Boudica refused to be a Roman trophy. She took her own exit using a hidden poison, choosing to die on her own terms rather than live in chains. Her daughters, their fate goes unrecorded. They vanish from historical accounts after the initial violation, their stories lost to silence. Here's something else about those triumphs. As the procession wound toward the Capitoline Hill, captive rulers knew their journey might end at the Mamertine Prison, the Tullianum in Latin ancient structure built into the northeastern slope of the Capitol line, Rome's final stop for notable enemies. While the triumph continued to the Temple of Jupiter, condemned prisoners were led aside. The Tullianum had 2 levels. Upper chamber was a holding cell, but the lower dungeon, accessible only through a hole in the ceiling that became the execution chamber. In darkness and filth, Rome's enemies met their end: deprivation. The process remained deliberately hidden while crowds celebrated above. Vercingetorix is the chieftain who unified the tribes of Gaul against Julius Music Caesar. After his defeat at Alesia in 52 B. Caesar